Yeah, it's basically like you have like a heterosexual marriage inside of you.
For those of you who are just tuning in, this is the Controversial Conversations live podcast. We do this usually every Tuesday. Phil is a self-identified autogynephile.
Autogynephilia, it's composed of three roots that together mean love of self as woman. Male heterosexuality, instead of getting directed outward, gets pointed inward, makes you look for a woman inside of you. And when you find that woman inside of you, it provides reassuring feelings and warm fuzzies. Basically, like how if you're in a relationship, these autosexual orientations, they can start out more overtly erotic, but then they tend to over time get more romantic, companionship like. It's more about bringing you like comfort and well-being and not so much about like eroticism.
Do you think that it tends to happen more somebody that society might consider to be an incel? Or do you think it doesn't matter if the person can or can't get laid? It's just something that's more intrinsic.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little more common among incels just because of the selection bias of they're not getting laid, right?
Right.
And a lot of times when that happens, it's not because they're ugly or anything like that, but that they don't know how to play the social roles and how to do the flirting and all that. A lot of times that's because people are autistic.
Which also has a big tie into transgenderism, by the way.
Right, which is why I brought that up because...
Right, it's a really good point that you brought it up.
So if incels are more likely to be AGP, I assume it's just because of the autism thing. There's a homosexual type of transgenderism and what I call an auto-heterosexual type of transgenderism. Just because someone is autogynephilic or autoandrophilic, it doesn't mean they're trans, but it is one of the types of trans. Someone that has any of these sexual orientations that leads to transgenderism, if they have them very strongly, there's a good chance that they'll end up trans at some point.
Okay.
But basically, transsexuals are a subset of the broader homosexual and auto-heterosexual population. I wrote this book called Auto-Heterosexual, Attracted to Being the Other Sex, and it is about female autoandrophilia and male autogynephilia, characterized by the fact that they're cross-gender attraction, that people are attracted to being the other sex.
He said, is it about actual sex or looking at yourself that way to get turned on, which leads to sex, right? Because when somebody like you says, well, I'm attracted to myself, looking as the opposite sex. Because I know a lot of trans women picture themselves before they transition to be women when they're having sex.
If someone is autogynephilic to a very strong degree to where that's their greatest sex interest by far, then they'll be more likely to require that sort of cross-gender fantasy to be able to even be interested in sex in the first place. I would imagine it'd be hard for you to like be interested in sex if there wasn't a woman involved.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So like if someone's autogynephilic, then there needs, and to a degree where it exceeds their other sexual preferences, then they would need to find the woman inside of them during that sexual experience for it to be satisfying for them.
It might mean being more submissive. It might mean just in your own head that you're picturing yourself a certain way. Like I know some lesbians that are like that. I don't necessarily know or think that they're autoandrophilic, but I know there are a ton of lesbians out there, maybe not a ton, but a good amount of lesbians out there who picture themselves fucking like dudes. You know,
yeah, a lot of them are autoandrophilic.
I think it might be a completely separate issue, even though it kind of sounds the same. For me, it might be just a very misogynistic way, like an internalized misogyny that we have as women about feeling sexual. So we picture ourselves as men. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of different issues that come into play with the possibility of talking about all this.
There's some lesbians that are autoandrophilic, and by being with a woman, they can be a man in relation to them. It's sort of like how autogynephiles will hook up with men to feel more feminine.
Right.
So that same thing.
Even though they're not physically attracted to the man necessarily, it just makes them feel more secure about themselves, kind of.
Right. This is called meta attraction. It's like when you have these when you're auto-heterosexual, and it can make you increase your attraction to other people based on what their traits say about you. And so if you're, say, like if you're an autoandrophile and you could be attracted to women, you know, particularly feminine, very straight and small women, you know, anything that through contrast can make you feel more masculine and bigger, you know?
Right. And the opposite would be true for somebody like you potentially.
Right? Yeah.
Does Phil identify as a woman, or is autogynephile a different thing?
In terms of like sexual identity labels, I either use transvestite, autogynephilic, or autoheterosexual.
How much does he associate himself as being female as opposed to being seen as female? I think a fellow autogynephile said most trans people like to be seen as the gender they identify, both to themselves and to others.
It sounds like the questioner is asking about like how a person sees himself versus how other people see that person.
Right.
With autoheterosexuality, when it's about how other people see you, that's the interpersonal. There's evidence so far for like 5 different subtypes of cross-gender embodiment. There's anatomic, which is having the body of the other sex or its physical features. There's physiologic, which is having its, bodily functions, like lactation, erections.
Okay.
The clothing, the transvestism, the behavior, like acting like the other sex. And then there's the interpersonal one, which is about how other people see you. It's about being seen or treated as the other sex. Do you know of any culture where men and women dress the same?
No.
Exactly. So even though it is cultural, it seems to be a cultural universal that men and women tend to dress differently. And so
I get what you're saying. So it's not the fact that they dress like women, it's the fact that they're dressing differently than women.
Ray Blanchard used to have this quote that went something like, if there was a culture in which the only difference in clothing was that men wore shirts with 4 buttons and women wore shirts with 5 buttons, autogynephiles would want more than anything to have the shirt with 5 buttons.
Do you respect women's spaces, locker rooms, bathrooms, by not entering in them, or do you feel the need to have to insert yourself into them?
6'4" and buff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna try to do that shit.
Good for you.
Also, I'm not transsexual right now. Going in locker rooms should be like transsexuals can do that depending on how passy they are. Kind of. There's been 2 decades of autogynephiles, autoandrophiles, not being told, hey, the reason you feel this way is because you have this minority sexual orientation that makes you feel this way, and it's okay to be this thing, but like here's what it is. There's also gynandromorphophilia, where people are attracted specifically to women with penises, like that look. It seems to be a type of gynephilia, or it's related. It's an attraction to women, because when scientists have hooked up men in the lab and shown them various stimuli and measured their erections, they found that the men that are attracted to like trans women, to feminized males, they're next most attracted to regular women.
Similarities in some ways.
Well, if you think of those lesbians that like packing and love to have a dick, like those types of lesbians. This is definitely a born this way thing.
I think so too. It sounds
it keeps arising generation after generation. It has a very specific pattern, becomes noticeable at the same age that conventional sexual orientations become noticeable, late childhood, early puberty. Yeah, there's a Pareto distribution for this where like most of the people that have it very mildly. But there's a minority of them that have it very strongly. And it's that minority that is disproportionately where the transsexual population comes from.
But there's definitely a spectrum in here, and I think it's really interesting. So what they're asking is, do you have gender dysphoria, like physical gender dysphoria?
I mean, at times, since I understand how this psychology works now, I can sort of monitor my thinking to make sure that I don't go down that path of being sad about something that can never be.
Somebody said, do you sympathize with other autogynephiles who get aroused by flashing their genitals and making women and girls feel uncomfortable in bathrooms and changing rooms? Just from based on what you've said, I don't think they're the same thing. I think that's just a dude that's fucking creepy.
That's a fucked up dude.
Yeah. Would you say it's what?
That's just a fucked up dude.
There can be people like you, and then there could be creepy men.
And the thing is, the people the AGPs that know their AGP I think they're going to be more likely to be respectful because they understand what it is, instead of it being like, oh, I just have this super sacred gender identity that everyone must respect.
Wow, somebody said their ex. A few people said they've dated one.
Say like 3 to 5% of males have it to, somewhat noticeable
to some extent.
Heterosexual, like autoheterosexuality and homosexuality are similarly prevalent in each of the sexes. Mm-hmm. And that males are twice as likely to have any one of these minority sexual orientations. I would say for autogynephiles in general, they have an increase. They're much more likely to be bisexual than conventional males. And that basically having autoheterosexuality greatly increases the chance that someone will experience same-sex attraction. And so it's because of this like indirect same-sex attraction that it's sometimes hard to parse, you know, which of the two types of queer that someone is, because
Right.
it gets blurry. You can find my book, Autoheterosexual, Attracted to Being the Other Sex, on Amazon. And I also have a Substack in which I've posted at this point maybe like 7 chapters out of my book, and I keep posting more just because I'm trying to share this information. I didn't write the book to make money. I wrote it to spread ideas.